The office was dead quiet, the way a sterile space is when everyone else has gone home. The only light was the harsh, accusatory glow of my phone screen in my hand. I was 3 states away in Manhattan, Kansas, trying to work, but my mother's text had frozen everything. Pay for your sister's prom or don't bother calling yourself part of this family. $2,800. A demand so petty, yet it carried the weight of everything I had spent 33 years trying to earn. My eyes lifted to the framed photo on my desk. Me, a shy, hopeful kid, squeezed between my parents, desperate for a genuine smile. I went into my banking app. There was the recurring transfer labeled simply Family Support. My finger moved, slow and deliberate, and pressed cancel. Then another, and one more. In 3 taps, the ties I'd been subsidizing for 2 decades were severed. But as I finally closed the app, exhausted, a brand new notification sliced through the silence, a bank alert for a large unauthorized withdrawal. Before I tell you what they discovered the very next morning when the money stopped flowing, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and if you've ever had to choose between your money and your family. They thought their ultimatum was the weapon. They had no idea that I had just found the very first piece of evidence that was about to burn their entire stolen world to the ground. My name is Annabelle Wright. I'm 33, a product marketing manager, and I built this life from scratch because I simply had to. I learned early that in my family there were always 2 roles, the golden child who was given everything, and the workhorse who paid for it all. I was the workhorse. I had to be. I am 17 years older than my sister, Audrey. That age gap wasn't just a difference in years. It was a difference in entire realities. By the time Audrey was born, I was already fending for myself, working part-time jobs, and saving every penny. While my parents poured everything they had, and eventually everything I had, into Audrey's lavish childhood, I was grinding through college, juggling 2 different jobs just to pay for textbooks. There were no handouts, no shortcuts, and certainly no financial support from home. My parents were too busy being the perfect parents to their little princess. But my reality wasn't about resentment. It was about survival. I pushed myself, knowing that hard work was my only way out of their orbit. By the time I landed my first major marketing job, I finally had the distance and the financial security I craved. That distance, however, was quickly closed. My parents, who had always lived far beyond their means, saw my success not as an achievement, but as an opportunity. 4 years ago, I fell for their story. They claimed they were struggling with basic bills, utilities, and groceries. I wanted to help, to ease their stress, and honestly, to finally feel like a valued part of the family. I set up a joint family account to which I made substantial recurring contributions, assuming they would only use it for necessities. It was a lifeline, a peace offering, and a fragile bridge back home. Looking back, the signs of their priorities were never hidden. I was just too desperate to ignore them. I remember turning 16 and begging my mother for $50 so I could go on a school trip. She snapped at me, sharp and dismissive. "We can't afford it, Annabelle. Figure it out." 2 years later, they threw Audrey a princess-themed birthday party that cost thousands. They funded every whimsical desire while treating my essential needs as an inconvenience. The most cutting betrayal came from my father. He once told a family friend, loud enough for me to hear, that Audrey was their second chance to get it right. I swallowed the insult and focused on my career. I thought that success would finally be enough. I thought my generosity would finally earn their respect. The true stakes were monumental. I wasn't just risking the tens of thousands of dollars I'd poured into that account over 4 years. I was risking the fragile, self-made identity I built, the hope that I was their safety net, and the belief that my financial support was slowly, finally, earning their love. Every dollar sent was a desperate bid for a seat at the table. Every wire transfer was a payment for a family membership that they kept threatening to revoke. I kept my head down, signed the checks, and pretended that my money was buying me peace. I always thought that by providing for them, I was proving my worth. I thought my generosity was a shield against their judgment. I was about to learn it was just their private bank account. The bank alert that had just sliced through the quiet of my office was proof that the family I was supporting didn't exist. It was just a scam run by the people who were supposed to love me most. The game was over. I just hadn't realized they'd been playing it this whole time.
For years, I was the family ATM. That wasn't an exaggeration. It was a job description they handed me the moment I set up that account. I was the one who kept their shaky suburban facade from crumbling. Audrey, the perpetually indulged princess, never had to lift a finger. And that was by design. She saw my money as an extension of her own privilege. Audrey needed a new iPhone the moment hers lagged for a second? Done. Concert tickets for a band playing 3 states away? Handled. Endless shopping sprees for clothes she'd wear once and discard? My parents always said yes, never blinked. And sure enough, the family account always seemed to need a significant top-up shortly afterward. They'd use vague, coded language. "We had an unexpected expense, Annabelle. The transfer is due, darling." I'd send the money, pushing the resentment down, telling myself I was being the better person. But the constant drain on my finances was nothing compared to the blatant disrespect that came with it. They didn't just spend my money. They spent it in front of me, rubbing in the fact that my hard-earned funds were theirs to command. Audrey would post photos on Instagram of her latest $500 dress, tagged with a grateful caption to Mom and Dad, completely erasing my financial existence from the equation. This was their game. Take my money, but ensure I got none of the credit or the respect. I was the invisible underwriter of their perfect family narrative. This pattern of cruelty and financial negligence came to a head with the infamous prom demand. Audrey's text was the catalyst, the spark that ignited the whole war. "I need $2,800 for prom. Send it now." The entitlement in those 7 words made my blood boil. It wasn't a request, it was an order, placed with the certainty of a CEO to a junior assistant. When I sent my firm refusal, telling her to get a job, the real show began. First, the entitled phone call. Audrey's voice was high-pitched and shrill, dripping with a venom I'd only heard when she was denied a toy as a child. "You're so selfish, Annabelle! It's my right! I deserve this!" She screamed that I was ruining everything and slammed the phone down. Then came the text from the parents, cold, calculated, and coordinated. My mother's message, which I will never forget, was the brutal ultimatum. Pay for your sister's prom or don't bother calling yourself part of this family. It was a verbal execution. The choice was clear. My hard work and financial independence or the phantom acceptance of a family that never truly wanted me. My father's message followed, short and delivered like a judicial sentence. Do the right thing, Annabelle. The right thing was always whatever served them. I didn't speak to them for a week. The silence was heavy, but underneath it, I could feel the tension ratcheting up on their end. They needed that money. That much was clear. Then came the false hope. Late on a Friday afternoon, my mother called. She wasn't angry this time. She was crying, her voice cracking with manufactured distress. She launched into a performance worthy of an Oscar, apologizing for the texts and blaming stress from rising costs and unexpected problems. She said they really are struggling and that they love her. "We shouldn't have said that, Annabelle. It was cruel. Just please, sweetie, don't cut us off. I promise we'll talk to Audrey about her attitude. Just reconsider." A sharp pang of guilt hit me. Could I really be the monster who let their aging parents lose their home over a dress? I told her I needed time, but that I would think about it. The line clicked dead, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the familiar weight of obligations settle back on my shoulders. I was already leaning towards sending them a smaller, emergency amount. But their timing was catastrophically bad. The very next day, the deeper betrayal was confirmed. The bank notification flashed across my screen, the large transaction alert I saw in my office. A single, unauthorized withdrawal of $5,000 had gone out of the joint account. My mother's tears, her apology, her emotional breakdown, it was all a stalling tactic. She was buying time trying to lull me into submission so they could pull a massive chunk of money out before I could permanently freeze the account. They didn't care about my guilt. They only cared about the liquidity of their private ATM. They weren't struggling. They were thieves actively trying to loot me. The mask of desperation had slipped entirely, revealing pure, cold opportunism. I felt a dizzying wave of cold realization. This wasn't just exploitation. It was outright fraud. I immediately called my friend Ellen, Ward, a lawyer in private practice, whose office was 2 floors down from my own. My voice was shaking, not with fear, but with righteous fury. As I frantically explained the $5,000 theft and the history of their demands, Ellen went completely quiet on the other end. "Annabelle," she said, finally, her voice dropping to a serious tone, "I think I know what this is about. My cousin works at the bank. He mentioned your parents applied for a second mortgage a few months ago and were denied. He didn't want to worry you, but this sounds like they're desperate." The sheer terror in her voice cemented my resolve. This wasn't just a squabble over $2,800. This was a catastrophic financial collapse that my parents had been hiding from me and actively trying to fund with my money. The game of family charades was officially over. It was time for a legal audit.
The unauthorized $5,000 transfer was the final straw. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was outright theft, proving their manipulation wasn't a historical pattern, but an active, desperate, and ongoing threat. They didn't just want my permission for a prom dress, they were looting the joint account while distracting me with a fake emotional crisis. I didn't weep. There was no room for tears. The emotional collapse when it finally hit wasn't a breakdown, it was a cold, hard compression. I remember sitting at my desk, staring out at the Manhattan, Kansas skyline, and realizing the depth of the deception, the hurt, the decades of striving for approval. It didn't dissolve into sadness. Instead, it sharpened into a methodical, icy resolve. The daughter who had always longed for a seat at the family table disappeared. In her place, a product marketing manager with a sharp mind for logistics and strategy took over. I was no longer a victim being taken for granted. I was a financial institution that had been defrauded. My professional mindset, honed by years of cutthroat corporate battles, took over. I decided I wouldn't seek revenge. I would seek accountability. And accountability, in my world, looked like a meticulously prepared audit. That night, I met Ellen, my lawyer friend, at her office. The atmosphere was serious, the air heavy with unspoken consequence. I handed her my credentials for the account. I had avoided looking at the full, unfiltered transaction history for years, terrified of what I might find. Now, I demanded the truth. Ellen pulled up the entire history, laid bare across the monitor. I braced myself for the total amount. I thought maybe $40,000, maybe $50,000. But as Ellen scrolled, clicking transaction after transaction, the number kept climbing. "Annabelle," she whispered, her own professional composure wavering. "Over the past 4 years, the total is just over $100,000. $100,000. Gone. Siphoned." The sound that escaped me wasn't a cry, but a single hollow laugh. $100,000 that was meant to be my emergency savings, my buffer against the world, was spent. All those times I'd pulled back from a large personal investment, telling myself I needed to keep the family support well-funded, they were laughing and spending it on themselves. The shock was blinding, yet it cleared my vision entirely. The family I knew was a fiction. My parents were financial abusers. We began cross-referencing the withdrawals. Ellen found patterns I would have missed: payments for credit card debt, a hidden car loan, and even recurring substantial transfers to a mortgage company that Annabelle's parents had always claimed was nearly paid off. They had lied about the core stability of their entire lives. "The money wasn't covering utilities, Annabelle," she said, pointing to a series of dates. It was bailing out years of reckless, unsustainable debt. But the real twist, the specific piece of evidence that transformed this from a personal squabble into a full-blown fraud case, came later that night. We were scrolling through 2 years of statements, looking for the earliest signs of major exploitation, when Ellen stopped on one specific large entry. It was a payment made 2 years ago, just after one of my major account top-ups. A payment to a high-end travel agency. Ellen leaned closer to the screen, her brow furrowing. She said, "That's odd. That's the same agency my firm uses for corporate fraud investigations. They specialize in complex international bookings." She pulled up the details of the transaction. It looks like a payment for a week-long cruise to the Caribbean for 2 adults and 1 minor. My breath hitched. A lavish cruise. While I was scrimping and saving, telling myself they needed the money for necessities, they were using it for luxury travel. Ellen looked up, her expression now hard, professional. "Your parents didn't just spend your money, Annabelle. They spent it on things that left a paper trail designed for corporate audit. They thought they were just spending my money. They had no idea their shopping sprees were leaving a trail of evidence that would be treated as legal fraud. This isn't just about debt anymore. This is a case study in malicious long-term financial exploitation." The cold resolve I felt deepened. They had weaponized my love and generosity. Now, I would weaponize their own arrogance. The transformation was complete. Annabelle the daughter was gone. Annabelle the strategist was ready to move. The next week was a blur of spreadsheets, legal jargon, and cold, hard numbers. Annabelle the daughter had stepped aside completely. Annabelle the investigator was working full-time. The goal wasn't just to prove they were selfish. It was to document every single step of the $100,000 fraud and build an undeniable case. Ellen, sharp and methodical, was the perfect ally. We spent hours in her office, cross-referencing bank records with public data. The joint account statements laid bare the history of the theft. $100,000 siphoned over 4 years. We highlighted dozens of transfers, the predictable monthly credit card payments, the large quarterly payments toward a hidden car loan on a luxury SUV my father had recently bought, and the shocking discovery of payments directed toward a second mortgage that, if defaulted on, would instantly sink them. They had mortgaged their home twice and relied on my salary to cover both. But the most damning evidence was Audrey's spending. We meticulously cataloged every withdrawal connected to her lifestyle, the high-end boutique purchases, the concert ticket funds, the mysterious payments to that travel agency, and the final, staggering $2,800 payment to a luxury event planner for her prom. The pattern was clear. My money wasn't for their survival. It was for their daughter's indulgence. Ellen wasn't just a friendly ear. She was a legal strategist. Using the network available to her through her law firm, she began probing deeper into their public financial records, the kind of investigation only a lawyer can conduct. The results were terrifying. "Annabelle," Ellen said, pushing a printed report across the desk, her face drained of color. "This is worse than we thought. The $100,000 is just what they took from you. Their total unsecured debt is approaching $500,000. $500,000. It hit me like a physical blow. The second mortgage, the loans, the credit lines, they had lived in a financial fantasy built on my false security. They weren't just struggling, they were a house of cards ready to collapse." Ellen immediately pivoted. She wasn't drafting a letter anymore. She was drafting a legal strategy. We decided that the best way to secure myself and force their hand was to prepare documentation for an official demand for restitution, backed by the threat of a civil fraud suit. They needed to know this wasn't just a daughter being angry, it was a former financial partner seeking legal recourse. Meanwhile, the moment the joint account was frozen, my phone became a digital war zone. The messages were no longer pleas. They were increasingly desperate and, above all, arrogant. My mother's text shifted from tears to venom. "You ruined my retirement." My father's were short, furious dictates. "Transfer the money back immediately or suffer the consequences." They quickly escalated to a smear campaign. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years started sending me vaguely judgmental emails. My parents were telling everyone that I had heartlessly abandoned them over a silly prom dress, painting me as the selfish, ungrateful villain who had caused their impending financial ruin. They were attempting to socially isolate me before I could tell the real story, banking on the fact that family loyalty, even manufactured loyalty, trumps logic. Their hubris was a gift to my plan. They were so focused on attacking my reputation that they had no idea I was building a fortress of evidence around them. The situation came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a high-level marketing meeting when my assistant buzzed, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Wright, your father is here. He's making a scene in the lobby." My blood ran cold. He had tracked me down to my place of work, the one area of my life I had kept separate and professional. I walked into the lobby and saw him, red-faced, suit jacket askew, shouting loud enough for the entire office floor to hear. "There she is, the thief, the ungrateful daughter who thinks she can destroy her family." He launched into a vicious public tirade, accusing me of theft and being manipulated by my greedy lawyer friend. His ultimate threat was delivered with cold clarity. He was going to sue me for emotional distress and elder abuse and ensure that the firm fires this heartless cheat. He was trying to get me fired, to crush my professional career and discredit me publicly before I could expose the financial truth. He had taken the battle straight to the core of my stability. I stood there, paralyzed for a moment. The professional facade I worked so hard to maintain shattering around me. Security finally escorted him out, but the damage was done. The entire floor had witnessed the scene. I was certain my career was over. My father's reckless arrogance was his one advantage, and he had just used it to try and dismantle me. Defeated and shaking, I walked straight back to my office. Minutes later, the door chimed. It wasn't security or HR. It was my boss, Mr. Davies, a reserved man who rarely spoke to anyone outside of strategy meetings. "Annabelle, close the door," he said, his expression completely unreadable. I thought I was about to be fired. Instead, he closed the door and said, "My parents tried the same thing with my sister. I know exactly the kind of emotional warfare you're facing. I want you to stop playing defense. Let me connect you with the top forensic attorney our corporate counsel uses for these kind of complex financial matters. Use my resources, Annabelle. It's time to win." In the deepest moment of panic, when I thought I was utterly alone, I had just gained the most powerful, unexpected ally of all. Corporate legal resources, backed by a man who understood precisely the kind of war I was fighting. The game wasn't just back, the stakes had just gone nuclear. After gaining the backing of corporate counsel, the plan accelerated into a professional operation. This wouldn't be a shouting match, it would be a cold, measured, and devastating presentation of facts. I agreed to a final family meeting at their house, but only under the pretense of discussing the potential legal ramifications of my father's outburst at my workplace. I wanted them relaxed, arrogant, and completely unprepared for the cascade. I drove out to their suburban house one Saturday afternoon, the two professionally bound folders resting on the passenger seats like twin weapons. The air inside the house was thick with righteous indignation. My parents were already in full victim mode. My mother was teary, ready to launch into a fresh wave of blame. Audrey, my sister, was slouched on the sofa, scrolling on her phone, utterly uninterested in the drama I was causing. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I walked straight to the coffee table and placed the first folder down with a quiet, solid thud. "I'm not here to fight," I said, my voice calm, the product of a week of coaching. "I'm here to close a business relationship." I opened the folder. "This is the full transaction history of the account. This shows the $100,000 you took from me over 4 years. My parents immediately erupted, the mask of victimhood dropping away. "How dare you?" my mother shrieked. "This is family money. You were helping your family." My father snatched the folder, his eyes darting across the spreadsheets, confirming the number. He tried to dismiss it with a dismissive wave. "It's family helping family, Annabelle. You'll get it back eventually." They were trapped in the arrogance of their own lie, convinced they could spin the theft as a temporary loan. They thought the confrontation ended there, with me shamed into accepting their version of events. Before they could fully regain control of the narrative, the front door opened and Ellen walked in. Ellen, dressed in a sharp suit, held a second, even thicker folder. Her presence was a shockwave. My parents' eyes widened, their bravado collapsing instantly into panic. My father stammered, "Who is this? You can't bring a stranger into our home." Ellen ignored him, addressing only me. "Annabelle, the total debt analysis is complete." She placed the second folder directly over the first. "Mr. and Mrs. Wright, you have attempted to dismiss Annabelle's $100,000 as a small, short-term loan. This document contains detailed evidence of your true financial position, the hidden car loan, the undisclosed second mortgage, and your unsecured credit lines." She let the words sink in before delivering the hammer blow. "Your total debt liability is currently in excess of $500,000. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. My father staggered back, his face draining of all color as the full, horrifying reality of their impending ruin, which they had desperately tried to hide even from themselves, was laid bare by a stranger. Their entire life was a performance, and the curtain had just been ripped down. The room went silent, broken only by the sharp, entitled voice of my sister Audrey, who finally looked up from her phone. "What are you doing to Mom and Dad? Stop it! You're ruining everything for me." That was the only confirmation I needed. I looked straight at my father. He looked broken, but still manipulative. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single, neatly folded document. It wasn't a threat. It was a professionally drafted, legally binding document from a corporate law office. "You called the 100,000 family helping family? Since I've never actually been a part of this family and you are clearly not going to pay me back voluntarily, I need legal confirmation." I handed the document to my father. "This is a legally drafted repayment plan for the $100,000 you siphoned from my funds. You have 30 days to respond with a confirmed plan for restitution before my firm is authorized to pursue civil fraud charges." My father dropped the folders. He wasn't looking at me or the paper. He was looking at Ellen. He finally understood. This was not a daughter seeking forgiveness or acceptance. This was a former benefactor, fully armed and legally protected, initiating a full-scale legal takedown. They had used my money to postpone their ruin. Now I was using their own crimes to guarantee it. The game of emotional blackmail was over. The game of legal consequences had begun. The fallout from that afternoon was swift, brutal, and total. My parents had only one option left to them. Within a month of receiving the legal demand, they filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They had spent years postponing the inevitable with my money, but faced with the prospect of an expensive legal battle that would publicly expose their fraud and potentially involve criminal charges, they chose to surrender. The $500,000 in debt, the hidden car loan, and the crippling second mortgage finally crashed down on them. They couldn't save their fantasy life without my income, and my income was now protected. The specific consequences were mercilessly clear. They lost the house to foreclosure. The suburban facade they had built and maintained with such arrogant entitlement vanished. I received a final, terse note from Ellen confirming the bank sale. I didn't attend, but I pictured the silence of the empty rooms, no longer ringing with my mother's manipulative cries or my father's demands. The wreckage wasn't contained just to them. A few weeks after the bankruptcy filing, a distant cousin called me, crying. He had co-signed a small personal loan for my parents months ago, completely believing their assurances that they were financially stable. He was now on the hook for the full amount, his credit shredded. Hearing his story, the collateral damage of their lies, hardened my resolve completely. My actions hadn't destroyed them. I had merely stepped out of the way of the destruction they had caused. Audrey's life also experienced a sharp correction. The princess who felt entitled to a $2,800 prom dress was forced to join the workforce. I heard through the grapevine that she took a part-time job at a clothing store in the local mall. The free pass was revoked, and she was forced to earn the kind of money she once demanded from me on a whim. My own life, however, entered a new phase of quiet, focused growth. The $2,800 that sparked this war and the thousands I was no longer sending was immediately redirected. I finally paid off the last of my student loans and began aggressively funding my personal retirement accounts. My savings account ballooned. My stability was no longer tethered to their chaos. I finally had a life that was truly my own, built on a foundation of reality, not guilt. A year later, the revenge story culminated in a moment of quiet finality. I was walking through the mall, heading to a meeting, when I saw her, Audrey. She was standing behind a cash register at that clothing store, folding shirts. She was tired, her uniform too big, and her makeup sparse. We made eye contact. The entitled sneer was gone, replaced by a dull, tired recognition. She held my gaze for a moment, offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then quickly turned back to her task. There was no anger, no shouting, just the quiet reality of a life that finally required effort. I walked away from the encounter feeling a heavy finality. I didn't feel the triumph I thought I deserved. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply stopped propping up the elaborate structure of lies they had built. The most important lesson I learned was that I couldn't save people from themselves. I could only save myself. And some days, feeling that quiet strength, that freedom from the perpetual burden, was better than any victory.
I know this was a heavy story, and thank you for sticking with me until the end. Walking away from my family felt like the hardest decision I've ever made, but it was also the only one that saved my life and my future. Now that you know the whole story, I genuinely need your perspective on the moral and tactical questions I've been wrestling with. Let's talk strategy and morality in the comments below. 1. The $100,000 question. If you were in my position, after seeing that $100,000 was gone and they were already on the verge of ruin, would you have followed through with the legal confrontation and the repayment demand? Or would you have simply closed the account quietly and walked away, letting the collapse happen without revealing everything you knew? 2. Tactical error. What do you think was my single biggest mistake? Was it setting up the joint account in the first place? Or was it the hubris of not monitoring it for years, assuming they would honor my trust? 3. The enabling line. This is a question for all of us. At what point does trying to help your family become enabling their worst behavior? Did I cross that line by letting their lifestyle demands dictate my generosity for so long? And 4, your breaking point. If you've been the one quietly supporting people who don't acknowledge your worth, when did you finally stop? What was your own kids' table moment that made you realize you had to save yourself? Share your story because I promise you, you are not alone. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to set a hard boundary with family, please hit like and subscribe for more real stories about family betrayal and standing up for yourself. Your support means everything as I continue to rebuild. Ultimately, I don't know if I made the right choice, but I know this. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own choices, even when you're still not sure if you made the right one. Thanks for listening.